what do you think about teaching? But more specifically, what do you think about your own teaching? So in many cases, when I coach intern teachers and some novice teachers, we have a discussion around thinking about your own practice. Because the problem is, so many teachers get onto the teacher treadmill. You know, that thing where you wake up in the morning, you go to school, and when you get there, you basically get into a lesson, you start looking at the annual teaching program or the curriculum says, I must now teach the following content. You teach a lesson, and then when the kids leave, a new class comes in and you teach them the following lesson. And you just move from one lesson to the next lesson to the next lesson. And then the afternoon, you're so tired, and then you get into extramurals, need to go home, you work with your family, or you spend some time with your family, and then before you know it, you're tired, you get into bed, and then the next morning you wake up again, and this entire cycle repeats. But do you find the time to actually think about what happened in the class, what were the interactions you had with some of the learners, maybe the parents, your colleagues? How do you reflect about your own teaching? And this is what today's episode is about. I interview Christine-Marié, who's a curriculum manager for the Curro Private School Group, and she does a lot of amazing work. She goes into schools, works with teachers, and specifically focuses on a subject of metacognition and self-directed learning. Now, I know metacognition and self-directed learning sounds like these academic terms, but in today's episode, we break that down and speak about how do you think about your own teaching, but also, and I think this was quite cool, is that she shared some of the techniques that she uses that when you teach learners to start thinking about their own learning, in other words, the metacognition around learning and what you've just learned. So that's what today's episode is about. I'm really looking forward to getting your responses in the comments down below. And of course, if you need any assistance with your own teaching and you'd like to improve the way in which you think about your own teaching and get some tips and tricks on how to improve your practice, you can just let me know, and it'd be great to have a coaching session with you. So just head on over to staysuper.co.za to see what it is that we do. But enough about me. Let's get into this episode chatting to Christine-Marié. Stay super. Christine, you have now finished your master's degree, as people have heard in the introduction to this video, specifically speaking about metacognition. You do a lot of different things as well, and we get into that during today's discussion. But I'm very interested in this topic of metacognition and teachers using metacognition. So metacognition is such a word that, and I believe you say that when teachers hear it, it's such an academic term, and we go like, what does this really mean? What is this practically going to do to change my life as a teacher? And in today's episode, I want to make sure that we bring across this message of what is metacognition really, and how can we use it to improve our teaching. So Christine, I want you to tell us metacognition, what is it? And specifically, like, bring it down to us for the teacher. What is metacognition?
Hi there, Fransha. Thank you so much for the interview today. What a privilege to meet you, I suppose, in real life, and what a privilege to chat about my research. The past 3 years, I've been doing my master's with the University of the Northwest with metacognition and teachers' worldviews and how it leads to self-directed learning and so on. So it's very nice to chat today. Okay, so in a broad sense, metacognition is defined as thinking about my thinking. Okay, that's what most Google searches will tell you, but in a non-academic broad sense, metacognition is simply a human being, in this case a teacher, who grapples with knowledge, who asks questions, who thinks about what they are asking, and then tries to find a solution. That's simply put, that's what we do.
Excellent.
Yes.
I want to stop you there, because I think that definition is extremely important, because the problem with teachers and the teachers that I work with in general, that I observe in classes, is that we don't think about our teaching, is that we just get onto this treadmill of the ATPs or the curriculum says I must teach this. I open up the DBE book or I open up the textbook, and because this is on the schedule for today, I start with the top of the page, I read through to the bottom of the page, and I give you a worksheet to complete at the end of the lesson. There's very little thinking from my side as a teacher that goes into that. I don't know what your feelings are on that. Is that what you're experiencing as well?
Yes, unfortunately, that is what we experience. I think when teachers hear the word metacognition, they run for the mountains, and they seem to have this idea that metacognition or metacognitive skills or metacognitive awareness is something that university lecturers do and that very clever people do. But the rest of the society, we don't do that. We do not engage in metacognition, and that's actually rubbish. It's such nonsense. Teachers are magnificent creatures. I'm also a teacher, and we can engage in metacognition every single day. We can develop it, we can model it to our learners, we can develop it in ourselves. It's actually such a wonderful tool for you as a teacher to apply it in your everyday practice.
Yes, and I think that's what's going to make us teach like superheroes. That's the thing that puts the average teacher and separates you as a great teacher from the rest, is that you don't just pitch up the day to the classroom and you read from the ATPs and teach in that way. Is that you actually think about your teaching actively. Now, I agree with you. Metacognition is a big word, and now we feel like, okay, now it's going to add to my workload. But in essence, this is what makes teaching the art, and asking questions about your own teaching. Now, I want to ask you about your master's study, and I think this is, I want to become a platform more for university students that have completed a master's or a PhD, and spread the word about your research. Because face it, I know I've completed my PhD. I think there's probably 10 people who read my thesis, and those 10 people would be me. I think my 2 supervisors and the 3 people who assessed it, and then maybe some people who did editing work on my PhD. I am not convinced that my PhD reached the masses and that teachers in the classroom is benefiting from it. And that's partly my mistake. But what I'd like to do is give a platform to other postgraduate students, and let's talk about the research that you've done and how that applies to teachers. So as a university lecturer myself and a supervisor of other master students, what is the problem that you tackled with your master study?
Sure. Well, the first problem I think was knowing what to do when. Not knowing how to tackle the amounts of reading material that you have in front of you, and in some way you need to make sense of that. I am not an English home language speaker. It's actually my second language, so it was quite tough at some stages to read all this information and then take out what is the most important part and then paraphrase that so that it actually makes sense, and that it makes sense to me as well. So there was a lot of writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. I think chapter 2, which is the literature review, I think we probably had about 20 versions of chapter 2 just because I had to grapple with the knowledge and I had to understand what it is that I was writing.
Absolutely. I mean, the process of writing a dissertation or a thesis, that could be a series of these episodes on their own. You've gone through the research. You did a lot of the reading of what is currently in the literature. From that, like what surprised you about this topic of metacognition and teaching? Like what came out from your literature review that you went like, wow, this is really interesting?
Well, I learned that it's actually not that difficult to apply metacognitive strategies in your everyday teaching. I used to think that metacognition was something very difficult, and that you had to plan and plan and plan, and then you do it from 8 o'clock in the morning until 8:05 in the morning, and then you are done, and then you tick it off your list. And I realized it's actually not that. It's a very continuous process, and it should actually become part of your everyday teaching. So that was something that I learned, and it's actually easy. Once you are aware of metacognitive strategies, then you are sensitive to incorporate it into your teaching, and then it becomes part of who you are. And then you model it without even realizing it.
Ah, good. So I want us teachers to get to that level. So
Yes.
if you say that metacognition is thinking about your thinking, I think it's becoming aware that you are thinking about your teaching. Because in many cases, you would be teaching and there's an incident that happened in the class, and I don't mean it in a negative way, or there's a moment that happens in the classroom, and you start asking questions like, oh, I wonder why the learner responded in that way. So that's, I think that's one form of metacognition. But please explain to us, like, how do we become aware of like the thinking about our teaching?
Well, what I didn't know was that metacognition, okay, so refers to thinking about my thinking. And then I sort of thought to myself, but what does that mean in real life? It sort of feels like it's just something that somebody said. So metacognition is divided into two parts. You have the knowledge component, and then you have the regulation component. And those two work together. To collectively, we then talk about metacognitive awareness. But the knowledge part is about having knowledge, okay, knowledge about strategy. So it's understanding your content if you are a high school teacher or even a primary school teacher. So you need to have knowledge about your content, and you need to have knowledge about strategies, how you are going to get the knowledge across to your learners. So that's the one part. And then we have the regulation part, and that's planning your lesson. It is monitoring yourself. It is evaluating yourself and your learners. So as you are sharing and imparting this knowledge, you are stopping and then asking questions. Have a look at the learners' faces, ask more, maybe revise, go back a bit more, get some more prior knowledge, move ahead. So you have a goal where you would like to get, but in your lesson, you play around with the knowledge and the regulation.
Okay, so we've got these two components. We've got the content, which can be summarized as the pedagogical content knowledge. So PCA on the one side, knowledge of my subject area, of the different domains and the content thereof, but also then knowledge about how to teach that content in which environment, which situation, like creating lessons around it. And then I like the second part, the regulatory aspect of it. Like, okay, now I've created a lesson, I've created a learning opportunity, and I'm setting it free in the world. And now I'm almost standing back and observing the lesson, observing
Did it work?
Yes, just let it free in the world and then see what happens. And I think in a lot of cases, teachers are like, we're control freaks. We want to control every single element of a lesson. It's like it's gonna. I always used to criticize the lesson plan documents in that it typically says that the teacher will be doing this and the learners will be doing that, as if we can predict what's going to happen in a lesson. But I mean, that's part of the metacognitive strategy, thinking about the lesson and what could probably come your way. But now, if I am, let's say, for instance, I'm a novice teacher, I'm a student teacher, I just started teaching for the first time. I've got the knowledge component going. I'm new to teaching, and I've started teaching my first lesson. What would your advice be on the thinking about my thinking part for those new teachers?
So first of all, good luck. Good luck. But I would say you need to have an in-depth knowledge of that which you want to do and have a clear goal. When you look at the knowledge, teach your learners strategic thinking. Teach them strategies to really grapple with this concept that you are doing now. The only way I passed my matric biology was a fabulous teacher who taught us different kinds of mind maps and, for example, a Venn diagram that we could see similarities and differences. When you teach your kids metacognitive strategies, for example, a mind map, you are helping them to understand the content. When they study, they can summarize it. And then when they get that question, immediately they see the mind map pop up in their heads, and then they can use that knowledge and start to answer the question. So they approach the learning process with positive beliefs about myself. And essentially that's what we want. So when we teach our learners strategic thinking. We are helping them to perform, we are helping them to recall the information, and we are helping them to write down the information.
Okay.
But for that to happen, you need to prep beforehand, and you need to know what you want to do and how you are going to do it.
So what would be one of the metacognition strategies that you prefer?
I love thinking maps. I absolutely love thinking maps, and that is something that I taught my little grade 4s. We did that in language, planning an essay. We did that with grade 4 geography when we looked at subsistence farming and commercial farming, the differences. So we used I don't know if you've heard of a double bubble map, where you can plot the differences, and then we just wrote down keywords and we drew a little picture. And I didn't do that when I started off as a teacher. I was new, so I used my textbook, and I would stand in the class and then I would just read, because I thought that was how we engage with knowledge. So it's actually not. There's so much more you can do. And you know what I saw, Francois, when you teach learners strategic way of thinking, for example, a thinking map, they get excited about the content, because they don't just see a textbook with pages and words and words and words and words. They start to see a visualization of that which we spoke about in the classroom with just 5 keywords. I know it's grade 4, but just to see my grade 4s understand the content, and they could recall it in a test, and they could actually engage with me about the pros of commercial farming and the cons of commercial farming. And that to me was great. Then I realized, something is working. I need to do more of this.
Okay. I'm intrigued about this double bubble method. It's a good microscript. It rolls off my tongue. It's something that teachers would remember. I want you to take us like almost step by step explaining the double bubble method. Okay,
so it's one of the thinking maps. It was a map I came across when I studied. I think it's Hurle, Hyrele, something like that, 2007. And they're different types of maps, of thinking maps. And they contained that if you plot your information visually, it helps you to recall the information and to understand it. So you get a bubble map, which essentially is a circle in the middle, and then it branches off. I suppose you can also call it a spider diagram, is what some teachers will call it.
Okay.
Whereas the double bubble is simply a circle and a circle. So you'll have commercial farming and subsistence farming. And then from each middle circle, a line with a circle, a line with a circle. So if you can visualize 2 bubbles, and then let's say 5 more bubbles on this side and 5 more bubbles on this side. And then each bubble is just maybe a keyword or a key sentence about what it is with a picture. So immediately, if we start talking about the differences between the 2 farming types, they quite battle with that. They bring out their double bubble maps, and then they see what I'm talking about, where it fits into the bigger picture. And that I realized helped. The children don't just see something minuscule, obscure over here. They can actually see, where does farming fit into real life? It's actually part of geography. It's part of South Africa and how that contributes to South Africa. So it makes learning relevant and fun.
So I love this. So if you're a teacher and you recognize that, okay, I need to improve as a teacher, I want to use different methods. You've now heard Christine explain to us the double bubble method. You've got into your classroom. You've done this activity with the learners. Let's say every learner does this individually as they summarize the work, or as you explain it, they start making sense of it using this double bubble map. You as a teacher now, you've got a visual representation of the concepts that learners have learned. Now, what would you suggest to that teacher after all of the learners have now completed their double bubble method, double bubble maps, and you can collect all of those? What would you suggest the teacher does with that information?
Oh, I would think, I love making a big display. So you can even take a whole bunch of A4 papers, stick them together, and then make your map big on the board. And then with collaborative learning, get the kids to, this half of the class can do the subsistence farming, and the other half can do the commercial farming, for example, and then draw pictures there and then stick that onto a wall or onto the board and make it a big visual representation. And also by the kids collaborating and chatting together and talking about the concept, it also helps them to grapple with the knowledge. They can answer each other's questions. And then that's usually where they ask very interesting questions. And you as a teacher can even say, oh, okay, well, I didn't know about that. Let's Google it. So it just makes teaching so much more fun and relevant. And I mean, compare that to sitting in a class and a teacher just merely reading a textbook, and then you have to go home and figure out what this concept means.
So you've spent the time in the class already grappling with the concepts.
Yes.
And now in a social setting, you've had a discussion with your classmates, you have a discussion with the teacher, and you've co-created meaning as a class together, which of course already helps you to grapple with the concepts and make you learn a lot more. So from a teacher's point of view then, you also get the opportunity to see where the misconcepts are, where the concepts are that haven't yet formed on the trajectory that we wanted them to form, and then you can start intervening. But if you were just, as you said, standing in front of the class, lecturing to them, there's very little opportunity for you to assess in the moment whether the learners understood or whether they've accepted the concepts or not.
Exactly. And you know what, by doing that, you're making learning fun. So I know it sounds like a lot of work. When I came across these bubble maps, I really had to study them and figure them out. But it's actually quite easy. And what I also realized is that you need to go to your lesson very, very, very prepared. This thing of walking in and quickly going through my notes 5 minutes before a lesson, that is simply not on. You don't have a lot of time in your classroom. When those kiddies come in, you need to start and you need to know, this is my goal and this is what I want to do. And when you make it fun for them, they really enjoy it, and then they want to learn more, and you are actually winning time in your classroom. And the kids really get, when they get to the end of the term for their geography regarding people and places or whatever it is we did, they really understand the knowledge and they really enjoyed the knowledge and they actually learned something.
Yes. And then the benefit of this is we can spring any problem on them and they can then try and solve this. As opposed to teachers trying to coach towards the exam and just having them answer typical questions, there's very little of use or of relevance to the learners. But if they co-create learning or learning like this, then you can pop any problem to them and they will have the I almost want to say they'll have the fuel to challenge and to solve the problem.
Yes. And then when they walk into an exam room, even as matriculants, because they have an array or a bouquet of strategies that they can use, they walk in feeling confident, because it doesn't matter what the question throws. Immediately they know, okay, I can either try this or I can try that, but I can solve this problem. It makes learning fun and relevant.
Now, every teacher's classroom is unique, so we're not for one moment saying like you should be doing this or that, and practically if anybody prescribes to you what you should do in your classroom, you can tell them to just exit your classroom. But I want to be a lot more crass than that. But the thing is, it's your classroom and you need to take charge and agency of your classroom.
Absolutely.
And try things, like experiment with these different methods. But as you say, the only way of doing that is by discovering the strategies that you'd be able to use. Now, what is extremely important, and I do this with the intern teachers that I work with, is reflecting on your own teaching. Did within the sphere of metacognition, did you deal with reflection? Do you have some strategies on how we can reflect on our teaching?
Well, I think one shouldn't be scared of feedback. I think when you have a class visit from your phase head or your headmaster or whoever, always be open to, I would say, welcome constructive feedback, because that's the only place where you are going to learn. So I think don't be shy, don't be scared, don't feel that somebody's going to criticize you, but rather welcome feedback and then apply good practice in your teaching. Sometimes it's really saddening if you chat to teachers and they think, oh no, but I'm Mr. Know-it-all, you know, I can just do everything. And they actually can't. So I think reflecting on yourself, number one, I would say stay humble. Know that you might have a gap in your knowledge. You certainly don't know everything, and you need to be aware of the fact that you don't know everything, but it shouldn't freak you out. You should actually be comfortable in not knowing, and then you simply Google and you find out. But I think a part of good teaching is most certainly thinking about what you did. And I would also say, be honest with yourself. If you gave a lesson and it was horrible, be honest with yourself. Maybe the lesson did not work because you did not plan. It could be as simple as that. Maybe the lesson didn't work because there were discipline issues. Maybe the lesson didn't work because you tried a strategy. I don't know. They were maybe naughty kids or whatever, but you need to be honest with yourself and see where you can improve. And if the lesson was a flop, it's fine. Tomorrow you start again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two aspects to reflection. There's I also want to say the individualized reflection, you thinking about your teaching on your own. And I typically advise people to keep a journal of what happened in the classrooms, like writing down, because at the end of the day, when you look back on the day, if you didn't write something down, you could often forget things.
Yes.
I'm not saying like write 8 pages per lesson. It's when things happen, just keep a quick journal of, okay, this happened, I want to think about this a little bit later on, and craft out some time to think about or answer the questions that you made. So on the one side, having the internal reflections, but then as you said, having this external kind of reflection in the form of lesson observations or evaluations. And what happens often in schools is like we get afraid of, oh, well, the principal or the HOD needs to come and do a formal lesson evaluation. And when it comes to school culture, we should actually create a school culture where teachers open the door to one another and you say,
absolutely,
please come into my classroom, please observe me, I want the feedback. Have you discovered things like this?
Yes. So it's interesting that you say that, I want the feedback. Some teachers don't like that at all. Some teachers feel that this is sort of, now we're going to talk a little bit about a worldview and the way teachers view themselves in the world and how they view their reality. I think some teachers feel, you know, this is how I was taught and this is how we are going to do this concept and that is it. Whereas other teachers might say, okay, it didn't work, or it did work, let's chat about it. So I think as a teacher, you must always challenge yourself. If somebody gives you advice and you don't like it, ask yourself, okay, did that person make sense now? Are they giving me good advice? Because sometimes I find that teachers are, maybe you're a little bit proud, or you may be a little bit embarrassed. So you don't want somebody else to give you good advice. But I think take the advice, take the constructive feedback so that you can improve on your teaching. At the end of the day, I find it very disheartening if a teacher says, no, I know it all, I don't want any advice. The question it raises is that, what are you giving to your children? And if you are not open to constructive feedback, then I am very scared about what is happening in your classroom. Yeah. Are you creating lifelong learners, or are you just merely standing there reading from a textbook because you want to get through your day?
Exactly. And you get to choose what kind of teacher you want to be.
Absolutely.
When you mentioned that, a story came up, an incident actually, as I was attending a conference, and there was a few hundred teachers there, and there was a speaker working specifically only with the mathematics teachers. And this was a teacher, I think she had 4 or 5 years experience, show and telling what works in her classroom. Now, in the audience, you had hundreds of other mathematics teachers learning from her experience. And then afterwards, during lunch, I had the opportunity to listen to a few people speak, and there were teachers who went with the perception that, you know what, who's this junior teacher who's got 4 or 5 years experience trying to tell me, who's a 10 years veteran in teaching, how to teach mathematics? So that was the one side. But then I sat at the table where there were teachers who were close to retirement. They're 30-year veterans in teaching, and they went like, that was amazing. I can't believe what I just heard from this young teacher. And it comes down to that mindset. It's like, am I able to put my ego aside to learn from, it doesn't matter who I'm speaking to. If it's a first-year teacher introducing a topic and speaking from their point of view, or whether it's a veteran teacher trying to assist me, that doesn't matter. My ego needs to be placed aside, because that's only when growth can occur.
Absolutely. The thing is, you need to acknowledge that. I think sometimes teachers are embarrassed, but I think once you get over yourself and you just develop an attitude of, I'm here to learn, I am here to learn and to develop because I want to develop professionally, then your learners are also going to develop. The moment you say, no, I know it all, nobody can tell me anything, you know what, you are preventing yourself from developing, and even worse, the kiddies in your class.
Yeah, I can't help but do this, seeing that the metaphor that I use is to become like a super teacher. If we look at the superheroes and the super villains, it's the ones with ego who become the super villains, who are isolated, who on that side. Whereas the super teachers are the people who form the Avengers. We are everybody with our own superpowers coming together to assist each other and learning from one another.
Absolutely, yes.
So I know now that you work with the Northwest University, and I know that the domain of knowledge that you guys work in is within self-directed learning. How does that link between metacognition and self-directed learning? Where is the link between that, especially in your study?
Oh, no, there are many links with metacognition and self-directed learning. There are many learning theories that can explain the link as well, but I'm not going to bore our audience with all of that. Metacognition, as I said just now, is about thinking about my thinking, you know, the knowledge and the regulation, and that also contributes to self-directed learning. Now, self-directed learning doesn't mean it is a child or a teacher. Sometimes people think self-directed learning, the child must be able to do everything by themselves, and it's not really that. It's rather a process whereby we prep our kids for what's coming, and I don't think anybody actually knows what's coming. But by making your kids metacognitively aware, by teaching them strategies, we are helping them to become self-directed. At the end of the day, if something happens at home or at school in your later life, you would actually want the individual to say, okay, I don't have knowledge now, I don't have skills. What can I do to gain knowledge and to gain skills? Instead of somebody to just stand back and say, oh, I wasn't taught in grade 4 how to do this, so I'm not going to do anything. We don't want that. And a self-directed learner, which can refer to a mom, a dad, a teacher, a doctor, a self-directed person is somebody who engages in the learning process, is somebody who thinks about their thinking, and it's somebody who wants to find a solution to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing stuff. For a moment, I want to touch back onto your master's degree. Of course, the dissertation that you wrote would have findings. Share with us some of the findings that came from your study.
Well, it was quite interesting. I worked with teachers from a specific group in South Africa, and one of the things that stood out, you know, I had a questionnaire about self-directed learning, and I must say I'm very impressed. The teachers were very much aware of self-directed learning and metacognitive strategies, but the moment they had to apply that in an online learning context, because that's when the study happened, teachers were scared. They didn't really know what to do. And that's when I realized that metacognition is very much context specific. So when coping in a face-to-face environment, the specific teacher group could cope, and they were aware of what it is they need to do, you know, take notes and attend a meeting and whatever have you. But the moment it started to become something, you know, online, and we had to teach learners online, there was this fear of, how am I going to monitor the kids? How do we do note taking? How do we schedule a call on Teams? How do we record? I know it sounds funny now, it's 2 years later, but at the time of the study, this was something teachers didn't know. So self-directed learning and metacognition is very context specific.
Yeah, So true, and especially that it happened in the time that it happened. I mean, the emergency teaching,
Yes.
moving into online teaching is something that few teachers are or were prepared for. I think
Yes.
we were forced to be prepared for it, but I think in general, especially in South Africa, it's not the case. Like the majority of the teachers are still not teaching online or in a hybrid methodology. So I can think that was the challenge. One question that came to mind is that in this questionnaire, you say that the teachers were aware of metacognition and they were aware of self-directed learning. But I think in general, teachers don't call things by the academic terms. They don't call it.
No, they don't.
And we don't call it self-directed learning. We
Mm-mm.
just, it's intuitive in many cases.
Mm,
Do you agree
it
with
is. Yes, I do. I do. And I think that's why, if you hear the word metacognition, embrace it. It's not something to be scared of, because we actually apply metacognitive strategies every single day without realizing it. And I mean, if you are a teacher, well, we are all teachers. In teaching, I think without knowing it, we are preparing our learners for life out there. We want them to succeed, and we want them to be able to do things by themselves. But I think teachers hear the word self-directed learning and they think, oh, no, that's something you do at varsity. Or no, I can't do this. I don't have time. I have to get through my ATP. I have to mark a test. I have to set up a spelling test. And I think, stop, just, relax and embrace this in your everyday teaching. You cannot give what you don't have. And if you are not a self-directed teacher, then you cannot model strategies to your learners to become self-directed. And also remember that learners don't walk in going in the first day of grade 4, oh, hi, Teacher Christine, I'm a self-directed learner. They don't do that. You have to teach them. You have to model. You have to show. And that's part of the lifelong learning process that we engage in.
Yeah, I agree with that. So from your study, of course, after the findings, there's the recommendations. So you've gone out and you said, well, I think we should do X to improve the situation in education. What's your recommendations?
Oh, I have quite a few, but I think the most important one I would say is make teachers aware of their own beliefs in teaching. Without realizing it, the way that you think about knowledge and the way that you think knowledge should be taught directly impacts the way that you are going to teach it in a classroom. So if you are a textbook teacher, then unfortunately it's going to come across like that. If you are somebody who likes to try new ways, then great, it's going to come across like that. So I would say a big recommendation for me is that teachers must be aware of their own beliefs in the learning process. And they should know that it affects the way that they teach. And what I would also, in my study, I developed a model to understand how teachers think about metacognition and how it imparts and how it develops self-directed learning. I would say that should be made aware to teachers, especially at varsity level, so that when you start studying, that you immediately realize, oh dear, these are my set beliefs, these are my absolute beliefs, and that as you study, that you can progress, and always be aware of the fact that you are developing and you are changing as things are changing around you, so that you don't get stuck in a way. You cannot teach the way you taught 20 years ago. You have to stay abreast of changes. So I think that would be my first recommendation, is giving teachers knowledge about their own beliefs, give them knowledge about what metacognition is and what self-directed learning is.
Awesome. So what I'm going to suggest here, and this is exactly the kind of work that I want to do, is that you need to become part of a network of teachers who regularly discuss these kind of things. So for the teachers who resonate with this, I run a mastermind of teachers every second Wednesday. So if you'd like to become part of that group of teachers who meet every Wednesday online, you are more than welcome to just reach out to me either in the comments of this video, or you can just send me an email. I'll put all the details down below. Maybe if you just go to my website, staysuper.co.za, and you'd be able to find a space for you to become part of a network of teachers who assist each other in becoming aware of our beliefs, and the way in which is getting these kind of coaching from our education experts, which you, of course, can find in these professional learning networks. Christine, there's so much to discuss with you. There's so much that we can still go into, but I think it is going to be important for our audience to go and connect with you on social media so that they can explore more about what this is and see the amazing work that you're doing. So where can people go if they'd like to connect with you?
I would say they can reach me on Facebook, Christine-Marié van der Westhuizen, or they can visit my LinkedIn profile, also Christine van der Westhuizen. I would love to befriend them. I would love to have these chats because there's so much I don't know. The more you read, the more you realize there's so much you don't know. So I would love to hear what other people have to say because it's a wonderful learning opportunity and development.
Yeah. So share your stories with us in the comments about metacognition and how you think about your thinking, but go and connect with Christine on Facebook and on LinkedIn and go tell her your stories about how you're teaching and go ask questions. I'm sure many of you would like to get her advice on things as well. Christine, from my side, I'd like to thank you for teaching like a superhero. That's what you've done during this episode, but then also for creating or doing the research so that many of us can learn from it so we can improve our practice. I'd like to thank you for the time that you've been with us. I want you to stay super.